Hello, everyone. Welcome to this one's dedicated to. My name is Jennifer Ziegler.
And I'm Chris Barton. We both write books for young readers, and we love talking with other authors of books for young readers about the dedications in their books.
And today we're so happy to be joined by Brandy Colbert, the author of The Voting Booth and other wonderful books for young readers. Welcome, Brandy.
Hey, Brandy.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
We're so happy to have you here.
We're thrilled to have you here. Would you mind kicking us off by reading aloud the dedication in your book?
I would love to. It's very short, but I'm still going to look at the page just in case. And it says, "For my hero, Fannie Lou Hamer."
And so Fannie Lou Hamer is mentioned in the book. It is your hero and also Marva, one of your main characters' heroes. And can you talk a little bit about the relationship that you have with Fannie Lou Hamer and your character, and why you decided to dedicate the book to her?
Yes, absolutely. So it's strange. People always ask, like, are you the main character in your books? I'm sure you both get that, a lot with some of the fiction you write. And it's like, no, not usually. And so this is sort of the most personally, and I've actually just connected it to my character. Like, Fannie Lou Hamer is my hero, and she's Marva's hero too. So I first discovered Fannie Lou Hamer a few years ago when I was writing an essay for an anthology, or maybe I had discovered her before that, but she fit right into the essay I was writing. And it was when I heard that phrase, "I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired." And I was like, who said that? And then I looked it up and I was like, wow, it was a Black woman from the South, a Black woman from the South who was a voting rights activist. So then from there, I just started sort of looking into her and trying to find out what she was about. And so I still haven't done my big deep dive, like read, a 400-page, biography of Fannie Lou Hamer. I haven't read her autobiography yet, but I've been really fascinated to read as much as I can on her in the meantime. So she grew up in Mississippi. She was the youngest child of 20 children in a sharecropping family in rural Mississippi. And she went on to become involved in civil rights, but not until later in her life, which I thought was really interesting. So she was born in 1917, and I sort of saw parallels there between my Southern family and hers. My parents both grew up in Arkansas. They did not grow up in sharecropping families, but they grew up picking cotton on their parents' farms. And so there was sort of that parallel. And then they both come from huge families too, not 20 children, but my mom comes from 13 kids and my dad comes from 10 kids. So I have a lot of family. And so there was sort of that connection. But then her getting involved in civil rights later in her life, I thought was really fascinating. And, she went on to co-found the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. And they were created because at the time, the Mississippi delegates were all white. And, they were like, that's not okay. We have a voice too, and we want to be heard. So they ended up traveling to the 1964 Democratic National Convention, and she was able to testify in front of them. And it was televised, even though President Lyndon B. Johnson at the time tried to basically like give some kind of press conference that would get her off of the television, but instead the television stations aired her speech, and she, gave an amazing speech testimony about how difficult it had been for her to try to vote in the South. And so, all of those things, plus she was a real advocate for poor communities because she grew up poor. So she created like a pig bank, which was like, gifting a couple of pigs to farmers, and then they would then breed those pigs and then eventually have enough meat for poor families. And so she just did all these really interesting things. And then one thing that I thought was really fascinating was like Marva, the character in my book, is a young activist, way more involved and active than I was at that age, or that I am at my big age now. And Fannie Lou Hamer got involved, like I said, later in her life. And so I thought that was sort of interesting that a young activist would be so inspired by this woman who didn't get involved in politics till she was in like her late 40s or early 50s.
What would you recommend to viewers and readers who aren't all that familiar with Fannie Lou Hamer but want to learn more about her?
Oh, so I think a really good primer on Fannie Lou Hamer would be this beautiful picture book. It's called Voice of Freedom, Fannie Lou Hamer, Spirit of the Civil Rights Movement. And it's written by the wonderful Carol Boston Weatherford and illustrated by the equally wonderful Equa Holmes. And it's just a really great book. It had been on my radar for a long time, and I just hadn't read it. And then I was at the Hamlin residency, the MFA program that I teach in, and a couple of our really great picture book authors who were there also teaching with me had it. And I took it, back to my dorm room overnight and read it and was just like, this is beautiful. I have to have my own copy. It's a little bit longer, I would say, than a typical picture book would be. It's a biography, which Chris, you're very familiar with, but it has so much great information. So I think anyone could start there and then just move on to longer texts about her.
At what point when you were making the voting booth did you realize you were going to dedicate this book to Fannie Lou Hamer?
I think, I don't know about you two, but I sort of don't think about the dedication until the end. And maybe that kind of comes from my creative style. Like, I don't outline, I don't really think too much ahead. I just sort of get into it. And then once the story's on the page, I kind of look back and like, oh, you did that, cool. You didn't plan that, but somewhere in the back of your brain was thinking about that stuff. So I think as I'm sort of writing the book, I'm thinking of all the people that have inspired it or who've been helpful in the process, or just someone that I think the material would really resonate with them. So I think like toward the end, I was like, I've already mentioned her in here. Who better to sort of dedicate it to a book about voting, a woman who did so much for voting rights in the South, where my family is from. So she just seemed like the most logical choice.
And to word the dedication in a way that echoes what Marva herself says.
Yeah, I stole my own writing. I plagiarized myself with the dedication. So it's probably the easiest one I've ever written.
Now, with your other books and your other dedications, I'm wondering, obviously with this, you can't let Fannie Lou Hamer know that you dedicated this book. I hope she does know in some way. But how do you usually sort of surprise people with this or let them know?
I usually leave it as a surprise until the end. So, my mom, I dedicated my last YA novel, Before the Voting Booth, to her, and she reads all of my advanced reader copies. So she reads it before it's in final form, but I never put the dedication in the advanced reader copy. So I just told her to, I sent her a book and said, look at I think I marked it and said, look at every page, but I marked that one in particular. And she was just over the moon about it. So it's really like fun for me to surprise people at the end of the process, because I don't think most people expect to have a book dedicated to them. So that's always really cool.
Do you want to tell us about your shirt?
Yes. Okay. So I wore a themed shirt. So I'm just going to stand up a little. It says, "Elect the Freedom Vote, Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer." And then at the bottom, it has Bolivar and Sunflower counties, which are the counties in Mississippi that she worked in and lived in. And this is a shirt from Philadelphia Printworks, which do a lot of really cool shirts honoring, important Black Americans. And so I have this in t-shirt form and also sweatshirt form. So I was like, I have to wear it today.